A 20-year-old mechanic fixes a Hells Angels bike, gets fired, but the CEO's secret revealed the rain was coming down hard that night, drumming against the metal roof of the old motorcycle garage like war drums. Inside, under the flickering light of a dying bulb, a young man named Jake Rivers worked silently. He was just 20 years old, with grease on his hands, a fire in his heart, and dreams far too big for the small town he lived in. The world outside didn't know his name, but tonight, fate was about to change that. Jake had grown up around engines and steel. His father, a mechanic before he passed, used to say, "Machines don't lie, son. If you listen close enough, they'll tell you what they need." Jake had held onto those words like a prayer, fixing bikes at a local shop owned by a man named Carl. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest work. He loved it. Every morning he'd show up early, wipe the dust off the tool bench, and lose himself in the hum of engines. It was his peace. But that night, everything changed when the door swung open with a crash. A group of bikers walked in, leather jackets, tattoos, boots heavy with mud. At their center was a tall, broad man with a scar running across his jaw. His jacket bore a name that made even Carl's face pale: Hells Angels. The leader looked around the garage, his voice rough like gravel. "Whose shop is this?" Carl stepped forward, stuttering, "Mine, sir. What can I do for you?" The man pointed to a roaring Harley outside. "My bike died 2 miles back. You fix it, you get paid. You screw it up, we'll have a problem." Carl's hands shook. "Yes, of course, sir." But the bike was no ordinary repair job. It was a mess. The timing chain was off, the carburetor clogged, the ignition wiring a disaster. One wrong move and the machine would blow. Carl took one look and backed away. This will take days. We don't have the parts." Jake stepped forward quietly. "I can fix it." Every head in the room turned toward him. The biker leader squinted. You look barely old enough to shave." Jake didn't flinch. "Give me an hour." Carl hissed under his breath. "Jake, stop. You don't know what you're doing." But Jake ignored him. He saw the challenge as a test, not just of skill, but of courage. He rolled up his sleeves, grabbed his father's old wrench, and got to work. For the next hour, the garage was silent except for the sound of tools, the hiss of oil, and the steady rhythm of Jake's breath. The bikers watched him closely, whispering among themselves. Jake's hands moved like they had a life of their own, every turn, every spark, every adjustment precise and confident. Finally, he wiped his hands, twisted the key, and the Harley came alive with a deep, thunderous growl. The leader's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned." He revved the engine, listening. Smooth as silk. "What's your name, kid?" "Jake Rivers." The man smiled for the first time. "You've got guts. And talent. Not many can make a Harley purr like that. If you ever need work, come find me." Jake nodded, feeling his chest swell with pride. But Carl didn't share his joy. As soon as the bikers left, Carl snapped. "You idiot. Do you have any idea who that was? You could have gotten us killed." "I fixed the bike," Jake said calmly. "That's what we're here for." "You don't understand," Carl spat. "We don't get involved with people like them. You're fired, Jake. I can't have you bringing trouble into my shop." Jake stood frozen, the words cutting deep. Fired. For doing his job. For being brave. He walked out into the rain, heart heavy, feeling like the world had just turned its back on him. Days passed. He couldn't find another job. Word had spread. The kid who messed with the Hells Angels. No one wanted to hire him. He spent nights sleeping in his car, his father's wrench sitting on the passenger seat. The dream that once burned so bright inside him now flickered weakly in the dark. Then, one morning, he woke to a knock on his car window. It was the biker leader. Behind him was a convoy of bikes, gleaming in the sunlight. "You're a hard man to find," the leader said. "Heard you got canned after fixing my bike." Jake nodded, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Guess I crossed the wrong line." The man chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe the world's blind to real talent. He handed Jake a card. It wasn't a biker club emblem. It was a corporate logo. Name's Mason Cole. I own Cole Motors. Jake blinked. The motorcycle company. The same. Hell's Angels. That's just old history, kid. I don't wear the jacket anymore. But I still love bikes. And I remember those who treat them like art. Jake was stunned. The man who had terrified everyone was the CEO of one of the biggest motorcycle manufacturers in the country. Mason continued, I've seen hundreds of mechanics, but none like you. I want you on my team. Not as a repair boy, as a designer. You've got something rare, heart. Jake couldn't believe it. The same job that had cost him everything now opened a door to his greatest dream. He accepted the offer, and from that day on, his life transformed. He worked tirelessly, sketching new models, experimenting with engines, pushing boundaries. Within 2 years, he created a bike that changed the company's future, a lightweight powerhouse that became a symbol of freedom and innovation. They called it the River's Edge, after the young man who built it. One day, Mason stood beside Jake as they watched the prototype roar down the track. You know, Jake, Mason said quietly, you remind me of myself at your age. Fired once for doing the right thing. Turns out, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Jake smiled, the wind whipping through his hair. Guess sometimes, you have to lose everything to find who you really are. Years later, Jake would tell that story to every young mechanic who walked through the company's doors. About how courage, integrity, and passion can turn even the darkest nights into new beginnings. Because that's what life does. It tests you, breaks you, and then, if you keep your fire alive, it rebuilds you stronger than ever. Answer: the boy who once fixed a biker's Harley in the rain became the man who built machines that carried dreams. His name, once unknown, was now etched in steel. And every time an engine roared to life, somewhere deep inside, Jake Rivers could still hear his father's voice whispering, machines don't lie. They just wait for someone brave enough to listen. Years passed, and Jake Rivers became a legend in the motorcycle world. His designs redefined what riders believed possible. Every bike he built carried his soul, a mixture of strength, freedom, and resilience. But despite his success, he never forgot where he came from. The rain-soaked garage, the night he lost his job, and the moment his courage turned into destiny. Yet fate, as always, wasn't done testing him. One evening, while Jake was reviewing new engine blueprints in his office at Cole Motors, Mason Cole entered looking pale and tired. The man who had once stood tall like a mountain now moved slowly, his shoulders heavy. Jake, he said quietly, I need to talk to you. It's about the company. Jake frowned. What happened? Mason sat down, his voice low. We're in trouble. A rival corporation's trying to buy us out. They're using dirty tactics. False reports, lawsuits, fake safety claims. They're trying to destroy everything we built. Jake felt a cold chill. What can we do? Mason sighed. I've been fighting this war for months. I'm tired, Jake. I need someone I can trust to take the lead. Jake's heart raced. You mean me? Mason nodded. You've got what it takes. Not just the mind of a mechanic, but the heart of a leader. But before Jake could respond, Mason's hand trembled, and he coughed hard, clutching his chest. Jake rushed to his side. Mason, someone call an ambulance. Within hours, Mason Cole, the man who had saved Jake's life, was gone. The news shattered Jake. He stood at Mason's funeral, the rain pouring again, just like that night years ago. The world had lost a visionary. But for Jake, it felt like losing a father all over again. Days later, Mason's lawyer called Jake into the office. Mason left something for you, the lawyer said, handing him a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small key. The letter read, Jake, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. You have a gift, one I saw the first night in that old garage. Never let fear or greed guide you. Lead with passion. The key belongs to my private workshop. What you find there will tell you what comes next. Mason Jake drove to the edge of town, where an old warehouse stood silent under the setting sun. He unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. The air smelled of oil and metal. In the center was a single motorcycle, covered with a tarp. He pulled it off, and gasped. It was a prototype, sleek, silver, unlike anything he'd ever seen. A note sat on the seat. This is my final design. The dream we never finished. Make it real. Jake spent months working on it, pouring his soul into every bolt, every curve, every roar of the engine. The bike became more than just a machine. It became Mason's legacy and Jake's promise. But the rival company's pressure only grew. They tried to bribe his engineers, spread lies about safety issues, even offered Jake millions to walk away. But Jake refused. You can take my money, he told them, but you'll never take my pride. The rivals launched their final attack, a lawsuit claiming Jake's new design was stolen. It threatened to bankrupt Cole Motors entirely. Investors began to pull out. Workers feared losing their jobs. The dream was falling apart. Then, one night, Jake called an emergency meeting in the factory. Dozens of workers stood around him, worried and broken. Jake looked at them and said, "When I was 20, I was fired for fixing a bike. Everyone thought I was a fool. But that night taught me something. If you believe in what you build, no one can destroy it. Mason believed in us. Now it's our turn to fight for what we believe in." His words lit a fire in the room. The workers returned to their stations, working day and night, refusing to let go of the dream. And when the lawsuit trial began, Jake stood before the court, holding Mason's final blueprint. "This design," he said firmly, "was built from his vision and my hands. We created it, not for profit, but for passion, for every rider who's ever felt freedom on the road." The court ruled in his favor. The rival company was exposed for their lies. Jake had saved everything Mason built, and more. A year later, the prototype was released to the world. It was named the Phoenix, a bike reborn from ashes, symbolizing every struggle they overcame. It became a worldwide phenomenon, not just for its performance but for the story behind it, the story of a 20-year-old mechanic who refused to give up. Reporters from all over came to interview Jake Rivers, the man who turned tragedy into triumph. When asked what his secret was, he smiled and said, "It's not about machines. It's about heart. When you build with love, even the darkest nights can lead to dawn." The company grew into an empire, but Jake stayed the same, humble, grounded, often visiting the old garage where it all began. He rebuilt it, turning it into a training center for young mechanics who couldn't afford college, giving them a chance like he once wished for. Every day, as he walked through the rows of students covered in grease and sweat, he'd say, "Listen closely to the engines. They'll tell you their stories." And when the sun set and the last student left, Jake would stand by the Phoenix, his reflection in the polished chrome, whispering, "We did it, Mason. We kept the fire alive." Because some stories don't end. They evolve, carrying their light from one soul to another, from one generation to the next. Jake Rivers didn't just fix bikes. He fixed lives. And somewhere in the quiet hum of engines, his father's words still echoed, strong and true, "Machines don't lie. They only wait for someone brave enough to believe." Years went by, and Cole Motors became more than just a motorcycle company. It became a movement. Riders from across the world wore its symbol not as a brand, but as a badge of freedom. Jake Rivers had become an icon of hope, a reminder that greatness isn't born in comfort, but in the fire of struggle. Yet success, as he'd learned, always came with a cost. Fame brought attention, and attention brought shadows. One morning, Jake received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sentence written in red ink. "You built your empire on stolen dreams." Jake stared at the words, confused. At first, he thought it was a prank, but then he noticed the signature at the bottom. CH. Those initials struck him like lightning. Carl Henderson, his old boss. The man who fired him years ago in that rainy garage. Jake hadn't seen or heard from Carl since that night, but something about the letter felt dangerous. He decided to investigate. That evening, he drove out to his old town, the place where it all began. The garage still stood, dusty and forgotten. When he stepped inside, memories flooded back, his father's laughter, the smell of oil, the night of the Hells Angels visit. But as he explored further, he heard a voice behind him. "Didn't expect to see you back here, Jake." Jake turned. There stood Carl. Older, thinner, his eyes sunken with bitterness. "Carl," Jake said quietly. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Carl spat. "You took everything from me. My shop, my reputation. I lost everything after that night because of you." Jake frowned. "You fired me. I didn't take anything, didn't you?" Carl stepped closer, his voice trembling. "You think you'd have gotten anywhere if I hadn't taught you the trade. You used me, used my shop, and then ran off with that biker and made millions." Jake shook his head. "That's not true, Carl. You fired me because you were afraid. I didn't steal anything." Carl slammed a wrench onto the table. "You don't get it. I had dreams too, kid. But you got lucky. That man, Mason Cole, he should have come to me, not you." Jake could see the pain in Carl's eyes, the pain of a man crushed by his own envy. "Carl," he said softly, "Mason didn't choose me because of luck. He chose me because I cared. You were too busy fearing failure to take risks. You taught me the basics, and I'll always thank you for that. But I built the rest with my own hands." Carl stared at him for a long moment, breathing heavily. "Then prove it," he said finally. "Help me fix one last bike. Show me that the boy I fired really became the man they talk about." Jake hesitated, but then nodded. "All right." For hours, the two men worked side by side again, just like old times. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the ghosts of the past. But as they tightened bolts and tuned the engine, something shifted. The anger in Carl's eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet respect. When the engine finally roared to life, Carl smiled faintly. "Still got it, huh?" Jake laughed softly. "Guess we both do." Carl looked at him and said, "You were right, Jake. I was scared of being forgotten. But you made me remember why I loved this work. It was never about money. It was about the sound of an engine breathing again." Jake nodded. "It's never too late to start over, Carl. Come work with me. I'll give you a spot at the academy." Carl's eyes widened. "You'd really do that? After everything I did?" "Because of everything you did," Jake said. "You were part of my beginning. You deserve to be part of what comes next." For the first time in years, Carl's hands stopped shaking. "You're a good man, Jake." From that day forward, Carl became one of the instructors at Jake's training center. The students loved him, his rough voice, his old school ways, his endless stories about the early days of bikes. He found peace there, and Jake found closure. But the challenges weren't over. One day, as Jake prepared to unveil a new electric motorcycle designed to revolutionize the industry, he received another message, this time, a corporate threat. A major auto conglomerate was planning to buy out Cole Motors, offering billions of dollars. His board members urged him to accept, but Jake refused. "We're not selling soul for profit," he said firmly. "This company was built on passion, not greed." The battle that followed wasn't fought with wrenches but with contracts, lawyers, and boardroom wars. Investors pulled out. The media claimed Jake was finished. But just as he had done all his life, Jake refused to surrender. He mortgaged his home, sold his cars, and poured every dollar into finishing his new electric masterpiece, the Spirit One. When it finally launched, it didn't just change the company, it changed the world. It became the first electric motorcycle that sounded and felt like a true classic engine, bridging old souls and new technology. Cole Motors not only survived, it soared. One evening, after a long day at the factory, Jake stood on the rooftop overlooking the city lights. Carl joined him quietly. You did it again, Carl said. You turned metal into magic. Jake smiled. No, Carl, we did it. They stood there, watching the glow of the city reflected in the chrome of a parked bike. You know, Carl said softly, I used to think machines were just machines. But working here, I think they've got souls too. Jake looked at him, eyes full of warmth. They do, Carl. They're built from ours. Years later, Jake's story became legend. Not because of the fame, or the fortune, but because he never stopped believing in second chances. He turned rivals into allies, failures into lessons, and engines into dreams. And whenever a student asked him, what's the secret to success? He'd smile and say, listen, to the hum, to the silence, to your heart. Machines don't lie, they just wait for you to believe. Time moved forward, but Jake Rivers never slowed down. His passion for building, teaching, and dreaming only grew stronger with every sunrise. Cole Motors had expanded globally, with branches in Europe, Asia, and America, yet Jake still preferred spending his days in the workshop surrounded by grease, noise, and young mechanics who reminded him of his younger self. But deep inside, he felt a quiet ache, a loneliness that success could never heal. He had fame, respect, and everything a man could dream of, yet his heart longed for something more human, a connection beyond engines and steel. One evening, while attending an international motor show in Tokyo, Jake met a woman named Elena. She was an engineer from Italy, known for designing aerodynamic body frames. Unlike others who admired his fame, Elena treated him like just another mechanic. Their first conversation started with an argument about bike design. You're too traditional, she teased, adjusting her glasses. You still build machines like it's 1970. Jake laughed. And you design like speed is the only soul a bike should have. Speed is life, she said. And soul, he replied, is what gives life meaning. That debate sparked a friendship, one built on mutual respect and admiration. They spent months collaborating on projects, blending her futuristic vision with his classic craftsmanship. Slowly, Jake began to realize something he hadn't felt in years: joy, not just from building machines, but from sharing them. Elena brought color back into his life. Together, they designed a revolutionary model called a Turner, a hybrid bike that symbolized balance between past and future, logic and emotion, art and science. When it launched, it became an instant sensation. The world called it a love letter written in metal. Yet behind the applause, Jake faced another storm. His health began to fail. The years of stress, sleepless nights, and endless work had taken their toll. His doctors warned him, you need rest, Jake, or your heart won't keep up. But how could he stop? He had built his life on motion. Slowing down felt like dying. Elena noticed his exhaustion and confronted him one night in the workshop. Jake, you're killing yourself for this company, she said, her eyes filled with worry. You've given enough. Jake smiled faintly. I can't stop now. I promised Mason I'd keep the fire alive. You already did, she whispered. Now let it burn in others. Her words struck something deep inside him. Maybe it was time. Not to stop, but to pass the torch. The next day, Jake gathered his team in the same factory where he had once been just a mechanic. I've spent my life chasing perfection, he said, his voice steady but emotional. But perfection isn't what matters. It's passion. It's the belief that what you build means something to someone. I won't be here forever, but I want Cole Motors to always belong to dreamers, not businessmen. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking into every heart. Then Jake announced his decision. He was stepping down as CEO. Gasps filled the air. The next leader, he said, is not someone who will follow in my footsteps, but someone who will make their own path. He turned to Elena. She will lead this company into the future. The workers erupted in applause, though tears filled many eyes. Jake had become more than a leader. He was family. Under Elena's direction, Cole Motors entered a new era of innovation. The company began producing eco-friendly models without losing their soul, blending technology with artistry in ways the world had never seen. Jake, meanwhile, moved back to his hometown and rebuilt the old garage, his first workplace. He turned it into a community center for youth, teaching them not only mechanics but also courage, patience, and humility. The sign above the door read, "River's Garage, where dreams begin." Kids from broken homes, jobless teens, even ex-convicts came there to learn. Jake taught them the same lessons his father once taught him: machines don't lie, and every man has a purpose if he's willing to work for it. Years passed. Jake grew older, his hair turning silver, his hands slower but still steady. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat alone in the garage, the smell of oil in the air, the sound of cicadas outside. On the table before him lay an old wrench, the same one his father had given him. He picked it up, feeling the cold steel against his palm, and smiled. Memories flooded back. The rain, the Harley, the fear, the fire, the triumph. So many faces, so many roads. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Elena stood there, smiling softly. "Everyone's waiting outside," she said. "They're holding the annual ride in your honor." Jake chuckled. "You know, I never thought I'd live long enough to see people celebrating an old mechanic." "You're not just a mechanic," she said. "You're a legend." Jake walked outside. Hundreds of riders waited, their engines rumbling in unison, their headlights glowing under the dusk sky. Every kind of bike imaginable, Harleys, cruisers, electrics, sports, lined the street. And on each fuel tank, a small silver emblem gleamed, River's Legacy. The crowd fell silent as Jake climbed onto the Phoenix, his first creation, restored and shining like new. He revved the engine one last time. The sound echoed through the valley like a heartbeat. "This isn't goodbye," he said into the microphone. "It's a reminder that no matter where you start, no matter how many times life breaks, if you keep your hands steady and your heart true, you can build something that lasts forever." Then the riders roared to life, hundreds of engines blending into one thunderous song. They rode through the night, a river of light and sound flowing through the city Jake helped build. As he led the convoy, tears streamed down his face, not of sadness, but of gratitude. For every trial, every failure, every moment that shaped him. Because he finally understood, legacy isn't about the machines you build, but the lives you touch. That night, under the starlit sky, the legend of Jake Rivers became eternal, not as a mechanic, not as a CEO, but as a man who turned steel into stories, and stories into hope. And somewhere, in the hum of engines riding through the dark, his father's voice still whispered, gentle and proud, "You listened, son. You truly listened." Years later, on a quiet summer evening, the sun dipped low behind River's garage. The students had gone home, and the world outside was calm. Inside, Leo stood beside the Phoenix, the legendary bike that started it all. He ran his fingers across the fuel tank where Jake's name was engraved and whispered, "You did it, Jake. You really did." Then he turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the sunset spilling through the windows. Outside, a lone rider passed by on the open road, the echo of his engine fading into the distance. It sounded almost like a heartbeat, steady, alive, eternal. And in that moment, everyone who had ever known the name Jake Rivers believed the same truth. Legends never die, they just ride on forever.